computer. Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to Talking Smart Conversations with educators and philosophers from around the world. Today I'm talking with Barbara Weber. She is an associate professor at the University of British Columbia, where she teaches philosophy for children, philosophy, and psychology. So welcome, Barbara. And so
thank you so much for the nice introduction, Morten. It's a pleasure to be here today.
okay, thank you. Well, we decided we were just going to kind of have an open-ended conversation on basically some stuff that's been of interest to us. And I think we can kind of begin by looking at, I don't know, sort of this is what I've been struggling with anyhow, the confluence and contradictions in hermeneutics and critical thinking and critical theory, and how that fits together, particularly across disciplines, and particularly across philosophy and psychology, I think, because that's a real kind of challenging area. So do you have any opening thoughts on that?
Well, maybe from the perspective of, I'm chairing this program, the Interdisciplinary Studies graduate program at UBC, and there it's one of the oldest and biggest programs of that kind. And sitting at the nexus, at the interlacing of so many disciplines, I think being able to translate different vocabularies into other disciplines is something that we are more and more urged to do, because we're expanding in so many fields and we have so many experts in so many subfields that it becomes harder and harder for people to come out of their deep hole of this expertise and look out and say, what is it that I have found, or what language am I speaking? And then to translate those findings into other disciplines. But also, when we have certain findings, always to ask, what does it mean for our life? How does it change the way we understand ourselves in the world? And how do we understand the world? So to come together and to find a public space of exchanging ideas that John Dewey talked about, right? He was
Yes.
way back then already saying that this is kind of this place is eroding, the public space is eroding, and both in academia but also in society, to where is the public space, where's the agora where we're coming together and trying to understand one another.
And so I guess maybe in some interesting ways, although this is also probably pretty controversial even, but I think one of those spaces has sort of traditionally been philosophy for children, because people don't bring a subspecialty to philosophy for children generally. And as a result, people write on a lot of different areas, but they don't, not many of the writers in philosophy of children take the opportunity to create that nexus that you're talking about. They still speak in their own language in some ways. Do you agree with that?
That is, I would say, it's both the beauty of P4C and what drew me to that place. But I am with you, and that this is also often a difficulty, especially when then we ask the question, well, is it philosophy, or is it now not philosophy, or what is philosophy? So then we very quickly come into a place where it becomes very complicated, because philosophy is many things, and especially in the beginning, and as you know, I mean, philosophy was the big term that had all of these other disciplines within it, like be from physics to medicine to psychology, education, and sociology. And so it becomes very problematic very quickly if then we think we do the correct way of philosophy and this is how it needs to be taught, rather than saying, oh, there are many different ways of how we can engage in a dialogue, and how are these different ways of speaking and understanding one another helpful because they bring the different voices together.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and that's interesting phenomenon because of there's a couple of things that make this very challenging from my perspective, at least. And one of them is, how do you develop expertise in multiple areas? And how much can you take your amateur status, if you will, into that conversation? And I think that's really, really difficult because there isn't a space for that and we have kind of lost maybe the idea of a public intellectual. And perhaps, maybe this is a very bold and I don't know, grandiose thing to say, but maybe a part of what I think about with Talking Smart is creating that public space where people who don't know each other can realize that we're having conversations across disciplines.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the place of the public intellectual is we have to rethink it. I think with every generation or every change in society, where is this place where we can share our ideas and share our thoughts and ask these questions? And I think, and I'm very kind of old-fashioned maybe in this way, but I always think that the one thing that the public intellectual should do, and of course he or she or they do it in different ways, but to enthrall the other in thinking,
yes, yes.
to invite and inspire to think further. Heidegger says once, he said, man ehrt einen Denker, indem man denkt. I think that it's not word by word, but one honors a thinker by thinking, by thinking with, right? And it is this invitation to think together and not to provide final answers, but rather to open up with each idea a space to think, because this is what I fear we lose these days.
Yes, well, that's very interesting because one of the I'm off to Rita and I are off to Chicago for the American Educational Research Association meeting, and one of the keynote speakers this Thursday night is Cornel West. And I don't know, in Cornel West, part of the reason that's so interesting to me is because, or I suppose it was about 1980. I had never heard of him, and I was teaching a freshman course at Viterbo called, I can't even remember the name of the course right now. But anyway, I as I began teaching the course, I also read an article in the New York Times magazine section, and it was about Black intellectuals. And it was just fascinating because here was Cornel West, who was one of the people that they featured, and talking about things like Christian socialism and pragmatism and all of those pieces. And I thought, wow. And so I remember bringing that magazine to class and just talking about it, because I thought this is a real opportunity for students to hear what a public intellectual is about. So, and we should probably go back to Heidegger though, and that engaging people in thinking along with other people, and can we kind of talk a little bit more about what that, how we engage and a larger public in that conversation?
Yes, yes. That is a very good question, especially since I always see Heidegger as a very like an hermit who thinks alone, and even though he always suggests that it's a thinking together, he was actually not very good in engaging in a dialogue himself. And yet, from what he's writing, I feel very inspired that it is this opening up of thinking, and you know, he says this wonderful phrase: the most thought-provoking is that we're still not thinking. And what does it mean that we're still not thinking? Obviously, we're thinking all the time, but what he meant, that is my interpretation, is that we often misunderstand thinking with rationality. That has to do with it goes back to more reckoning, like a reckoning or a rationalization. That is the shortest possible way to solve a problem. So here we have the problem, and here we solve it, and then it's done. So it jumps towards the end of the thinking and to actually overcome thinking. So the goal is to overcome thinking rather than to stay in thinking. And so what Heidegger suggests is that we have the possibility, it is a present, in the sense of a gift, that sometimes we are allowed into the present as the now, and we can linger, we can dwell and fall into thoughtfulness, that we are really pondering on a deeper level, not so much to solve it, but to remain, so we become a question to ourselves. So Augustinus actually says that in the, I think in the Confessions, I have become a question to myself. And I think that is the start of thinking, is this deep understanding that now I'm a question to myself, and not to run away from this moment, but to allow to stay in this place as long as we can, as this is something that is unique to an existential being in the world. Existere means to stand out, but also stand in. We're always both. We stand into the world by being embodied into time, but we always also stand out, as we're not merging with the world. We are separate as a body, and we're separate. We know about the moment. We can pull ourselves out of the movement of time, and we can say, oh, now this is what's happening. So we always stand in and we stand out. And in order to think, we need to remain in this two-way, ambiguous way of standing into the world and still standing out. And it can be uncomfortable, but this is an existential way of thinking. And it doesn't happen all the time, but that it can happen is unique.
Yes, yes. And it's an interesting dynamic of the world that we have less close face-to-face opportunities to engage in the public forum, and many more opportunities to do it in this fashion at a distance. And yet, what we've learned to do inadvertently at a distance, I think, is to make it shorter and quicker and less in-depth and less staying with a thought than we would do in an ordinary conversation.
Yes.
So, and
yes.
and that's kind of the problem. And maybe this is inappropriate leap here, but I think about this too in terms of the complexity of these ideas that we first started thinking about you know, the ways that we understand the nature of knowledge and what is truth and what is value and all of those. And we say things kind of offhand in public discourse that truth is tentative. And I think people hear that and they think, oh, yes, that means whatever I say is true. And that's with young students, that's with politicians, that's with pundits. And so we have this complex world where there's one understanding of tentative truth and a totally different understanding of tentative truth. No.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And I think it's very well put. And it is I think there are multiple aspects to that. I think coming back, I first talk about the public space, but then also about the different truth claims, because that is, I think, a huge issue. But in part because I think, and I know very little about this, but what I know is that with how we use the internet, we tend to be reinforced in what our own thoughts are already. So it is not in the form of an agora where things come together in a public middle space and then being discussed, which would be like a liquefaction of ideas where hardened ideas become liquid and negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
Or we become aware even of what we're thinking, right? Dewey says at one point, he says, often we do not even know what we're thinking until we're being asked and engaged in a dialogue. I think this is so central, right? Sometimes we don't even know what we're thinking. And that's why this dialogue is so important. But when we get caught up, it's more like a network, the internet, and we can get lost in like a maze of ideas and in a little corner. And now it's reinforced and we're not, there's no chance of us getting out because everything is reinforcing this one idea. And I think that is, I don't know how to solve it, but it's a vicious cycle. And maybe even more, I feel philosophy for children where, again, I'm very Deweyan in my thinking today. Seeing the schools as embryonic places of democracy, if children can learn there to constantly question their own ideas and challenge one another and being open to these different perspectives, that's the only thing I can see right now, how to even remotely pull people out of that, not when they're older, but to start early on. Yes. Create a culture of democratic dialogue.
Yeah, and what I know of too of the internet, I mean, I tend to, I mean, to me, the internet has been a blessing because of the fact that I can access almost any library in the world and spend as much time there as I want to. But and so I don't know much about Facebook and TikTok and all of the rest of those things. But what I hear is that just reinforces opinions that are there. And I just this is you can see.
Oh yes, yeah, how we think. There you go.
This is such a that's probably the Dewey that I have read most often, because I think it's really quite foundational in terms of a lot of his work, and he sees that I see that his other works have just enriched what he was saying in that book in some ways anyway. So
yes, absolutely.
and but now that this is the bridge and that how do we, okay, so we start with the kids, and it's interesting because you know, I spent 45 minutes almost with Roger Sitcliffe on this topic in some ways, and he has his thinking moves from A to Z, and it's very interesting because it's not, it would not be at all fair to say what Roger does is anti-depth, but it really focuses on thinking skills in the moment more than dwelling in thought. And so, and those two are connected and important, and they go together, but they have a different place.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
uh,
Yes. But that is the wonderful thing about philosophy for children, is that to recognize that all of these ways of engaging children in philosophical ideas or dialogue is all important. I would not never say, oh, critical thinking, let's throw it out. No, we need that. We need that, and we need other ways of thinking too. And so it's to recognize that the difference or plurality is always a value. It's in itself, and to see it's the appropriateness. It's almost like an aesthetic idea that many things come together in a specific way, and it's complex, but it's an aesthetic seeing it togetherness rather than saying, well, only this is important, or hierarchical. Often we say, oh, this is the most important, and then comes this and this and this. And that's an anti-aesthetical way of seeing it. An aesthetical way of seeing it is to see how things can be related with one another in a beautiful way,
yes,
in a
yeah.
beautiful, enriching way that doesn't get them stuck, but they all can develop further. And there, I wanted to come back to your, because you have a very important question that's about the truth, right? Truth
Yeah.
claims, values, and the idea of appropriateness, and in an aesthetic sense, here too has a place insofar as with values, but also with truth, that we understand how not only the outcome, like this is true and this is not true, but in which context is something true
Yes.
or meaningful, and in what context it is maybe not true or not meaningful or not. So it's you can look at a painting and you can say, well, that cost $10,000. And it is one, it could be true, but it's not the only way of looking at a painting. And so to become sensitive that truth, how did we get to this truth claim? And is that appropriate or meaningful in that context? But it's very complicated, right? And then also things evolve. We've seen that with COVID, and how if it hadn't been so tragic, it would have been comical how many people said, well, science says this, and then it changes and it says this. And to me, it was so beautiful to see, oh, we're finding new things, and here's science in action, and they need to communicate it right away in their vulnerability of what they know and don't know, and they need to be very appropriate, right? They need to constantly do this. And in a way, I thought it was very beautiful to see science in action, but for many it was, see, they don't know nothing because they changed their opinion. But in philosophy for children, we know changing your opinion means to learn.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and that's a really, and that gets at one of my ongoing questions is how to bridge that gap with where truth can be tentative, but it's only important, its tentativeness is only important in terms of having a complex understanding of the situation and the context and the meaning of what that truth is, and that it can be evolving, and and actually devolving as well, because I mean, yeah, I mean, you think about things that we know so well in some ways, Darwin, and we think, well, yeah, we all know what that's about. And then we find out about genetic theory, and we find out about, oh, well, some things seem to be able to happen in a Lamarckian way and not necessarily in a Darwinian way. And it ends up, and people just throw up their hands and they say, no, it's what I believe in.
It is, yes, I don't know if other people see that too, but I do see an increase of in the beginning of this semester, when we start to engage in dialogue, that some students do say, well, this is just I have done my own research. That's the number one what I hear, which is in itself is, you can never do your own research, because research is always collaborative and always in relationship. Or this is my opinion, or this is my truth. That's my truth. And but this is not, there is no such thing.
Yes, yes.
It does not exist. And what does it take? So maybe the question is, what does it take for citizens to grow up and to feel comfortable with not knowing?
Yes.
And to reach out in the yearning to understand.
And within that not knowingness, being able to take action. That's the other part of this, I think, because we need to be people who are acting on what we know, even if what we know is tentative and not permanent.
Yes.
And that was the problem with the COVID.
Yes, exactly. This is exactly so. People needed to take action in the absence of knowing everything, and doing the best they could in this moment. And there's this beautiful quote by Hannah Arendt in The Human Condition, where she says, we never know what will come from our political actions or our actions. And they might lead to something that we did not intend.
Oh, yes.
But have this very human, there's a miracle that we have as humans, and that is to forgive. We can forgive the other, and the other one can promise. So it's a forgiveness towards the past and the promise towards the future.
I think it's time to end, and if you'll pardon me, I'm going to grab this. And maybe this is a good way to end, if you will allow it. I will do a little quote from Women's Ways of Knowing that I go to oftentimes. And I probably won't be able to find it off right there. It should be. Oh, yes, here it is. We do not think of ordinary people as preoccupied with such difficult and profound questions as, what is truth? What is authority? To whom do I listen? What counts for me as evidence? How do I know what I know? Yet to ask ourselves these questions and to reflect on our answers is more than an intellectual exercise, for our basic assumptions about the nature of truth and reality, the origins of knowledge, and the origin of knowledge shape the way we see the world and ourselves as participants in it. They affect our definitions of ourselves, the way we interact with others, our public and private persona, our sense of control over life events, our view of teaching and learning, and our conceptions of morality. And I quote that often because I think that's what, for me, that's what education is about, is struggling with those very questions. And whether that happens in sociology, psychology, philosophy, or mathematics, it's all the same question.
Yes, yes. It's a beautiful way to summarize it and end this. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, anything that you would like to say to end this conversation?
just that it is always such a joy and delight to speak with you, Mort, and that I congratulate you on these little interviews here. They're really they're like a bright light on the horizon.
I appreciate that very much, and I wish to thank you. And I will not end. I'll record this now. So, and
Okay.
I don't know what that was. Anyway, we'll and then I'll get back to him. And yeah, that's
Okay.
yeah. I think he's doing okay though, and his book should be finished by now, I think, and
Oh,
be
wonderful.
yeah. So. Which I still don't understand exactly what he's doing in his book, but if you, it's something about life in other worlds. I don't know.
Okay. I'll look forward.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great talking to you, and so thank you very much.
Okay, and we stay in touch. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you,
I
Mort.
will. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.